Hello, this is Dr. Weaver, and I thought we would unpack the example of the annotated bibliography that you find in the announcements for Module 2. You'll notice that the title page is consistent with the APA 7th edition for students. We start out with the title, and then Be Better Now, a student name, Southern New Hampshire University, the full name and number of the course, my name, and the date. Now, the annotated bibliography has a certain format that is customary, and we'll follow that here. There are a few added sections that the assignment requires, so please notice that. First of all, the achievement gap summary is just your statement, your achievement gap statement. This annotated bibliography is intended to examine the achievement gap in reading. This is the subject, the core subject, and between students at the 4th grade level. So you also have to have the grade level. And then, who does this concern? With or without disabilities. Those are the 3 key ingredients in your achievement gap statement. Nothing more is needed. All right, how about the key terms and phrases? These are the terms that you used when you were researching and trying to find the resources that you would report on in this annotated bibliography. Notice that we just have the words, the terms, or the phrases. There are no definitions. When you get to the literature review, there will be definitions, and they must come from the source. That means the research that you have reported on in the literature review. So as you're gathering these sources, go ahead and write down the definition for each one of these and cite it. This can be on note cards, or you can do it on a Word document, but make sure that you have this information and you get it now. It'll save you a lot of time. All right, the next part is the context. And the context is very important because you've got to understand that it's T-E-X-T, not content, T-E-N-T. This is not about what the sources said. This is about how the sources gathered their information. So you want to say the type of study. This was a meta-analytical review of existing literature. So there was no new study conducted by Collins et al. None. This was something that was already there, but they put it together and reviewed it. Now, here is Peng and Goodrich. They administered, so that means this was their study, a quasi-experimental study. Very important that you tell the kind of study. And then they said several studies, and that's all right to say several studies, but you must name those studies. And she did so. She said that they included large sample sizes and provided a comprehensive picture of the targeted population. I would have liked to have the exact number of this large sample, and I would have liked to know what the targeted population or who the targeted population was. So I would include those, and she didn't in this. All right, moving on. This is the summary. This is the body of your work in the annotated bibliography. First, you have to have a full reference, and it has to be correctly indented like this. This is called a hanging indent. And you have the author's last name, followed by at least the first initial. The second is optional. Then you have the date it was published. Then comes the title. I still can't use this correctly. The title of this particular article. There, that's better. See, I told you I was learning this. Then you are going to have the name of the journal, and notice that it is in italics, and then the volume, and then the pages. This is the traditional and acceptable APA style for a reference. All right, and then the annotation. In this peer-reviewed journal article, so we already know where this originated, and here is something that's important. You must have the name of the researcher or researchers who wrote this, and the publication date. Now you might say, well, I just mentioned that right above, but when you are ready to move all of this into your literature review, you're not going to use that reference. So you're going to need to know who this was about and who wrote this. So that's important. Now, what else did she include in the annotation? Well, she described how this was relevant to the achievement gap. And she said it right here. She talked about it. And then she reviewed again that this was a meta-analysis. Now, please don't use the exact text that you did in any other section, but rephrase it. But you may still mention it. And what I really like that she did, she included the grade level. That's important. Then she told us, what did the researchers find? Please tell us the findings, or it won't make any sense at all. So she said, overall, students without disabilities were more successful than peers with disabilities in their study. And then at the end, another very important thing, she put in the conclusions. Please tell us, what did they decide after they had done all of this study? And then she goes on and carries on the same exact format for the other sources that she's using. Now, I want to stop a minute and talk about the source that was from 2011. Please try to keep all of your sources within the last 10 years. That would mean no source older than 2012. She does talk about how this was like the bedrock study for what comes after that. This really is not necessary in the particular project that you're working on. If you just have to do it, okay, but please don't go any further than 2011, because when the administrator is looking to see whether or not he likes what he's seeing in your curriculum, he's going to look at the literature review, and he's going to look at these dates, and he wants to know, is this something that has happened recently so we know it's going to work in our particular educational climate, or is this something from 10, 15 years ago, and we've just moved on? So consider that as you're looking for your sources. All right, then we're going down to the final two sections in your assignment. This is contributing factors and best practices. The contributing factors are the conclusions and support of your achievement gap. In the annotated bibliography, you have to prove that these kind of achievement gaps are not just happening at your little school or your district. This is a national problem, and you are going to use this to form the curriculum that will bridge the gap. That's the whole purpose of your final project. So again, she has listed each of these authors, and she said what they learned. She said the authors note that students with disabilities often perform poorly on test items that require the application of higher order thinking skills. So when you do an assessment and you're thinking about how you're going to assess these students in your curriculum, you need to take Collins and his work into consideration. Now, Gilmore talked about students with disabilities placed in a general education classroom. That's very important. Now, I want to point out that she did not have very many best practices, and sometimes that's not the fault of the author here. It can be the fault of the research, because often you can find a lot of research that supports the achievement gap, but not too many that might come up with a remedy. But here she talks about Peng and Goodrich, and it showed that traditional evidence-based reading practices does not address the needs of all students. But these students might benefit from programming that includes working memory and reading skills and strategies. Now that is the little key to what this student will put into her curriculum plan. So that's what this section is about. And moving on to the final section, justification. This is where you're going to prove to your reader that the authors come from universities or other think tanks that are recognized. They are published in a journal, not just the journal author. Now don't just put the name and nothing else, because what's important is not that they were in the Journal of Learning Disabilities, because we already knew that, we saw it in your reference, but that the Journal of Learning Disabilities was published in conjunction with the Hamill Institute on Disabilities. Now that's what gives credibility, not the name of the journal, but that it was affiliated with the Hamill Institute on Disabilities. And then another one talked about the American Psychological Association and how important that was. And we all know that they are very good. And then she wanted to talk about the relevancy of each of these researchers to this particular achievement gap. That's very, very important that we do that. For example, so here's the relevance of the research. The oldest article was included not only because it provides evidence of the achievement gap and examines possible causes, but it shows that this achievement gap has been a concern for nearly a decade. So see, that's where she proved that one of her sources was allowed, even though it was so old. Looking here, the Shute et al. And Gilmore articles provided comprehensive evidence that the achievement gap exists, and, this is the good part, suggest reasons for its occurrence. So she goes over each one of hers different kinds of articles and helps the reader realize why these were respected people and authors and why their research should be considered. And that's it. There is no reference list, not in an annotated bibliography. I hope this has helped you, and I hope you will find this particular example listed in Module 2 Announcements and use it as your guide. Again, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to contact me by email, on the discussion forum, or give me a phone call. Nice chatting with you today. Goodbye.